So,
I have a question. Does it sound better like this? Or does it sound like this? Or is it the same?
it's for me, it sounds better like this. Like this.
Oh, I've been told that before.
All right.
Okay, wait, how do you pronounce your name? How should I address you?
Just call me Vinicius.
Vinicius?
Yes.
Oh, okay, very good.
So, thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
And
Thanks
yeah.
for inviting me.
What?
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. If you want to make an introduction, just to start off, that will be,
Okay.
that'll be good.
So I'll introduce myself to start off.
Yes. If you
Okay. Oh, by the way, let me try one other speaking device. And let me know how it is. Does this sound?
Yes.
This sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, and you were referred to me by Walter Block, right?
That is correct. Yes.
And that means you're a libertarian, is that right?
Yes.
I'm a detective.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. What time is it there in Spain?
No, it's actually in Brazil, and it's.
Oh, you're in
8 o'clock.
Brazil.
Yeah.
It's what?
8 o'clock right now.
8 o'clock p.m.?
No, AM.
A.m.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thanks for getting up so early for this.
Oh, no problem. So, just before you introduce yourself,
Yeah.
do you consider yourself libertarian or?
Yes, I am a libertarian for many, many, many years.
All right. All right.
I am also a live and let liver. Have you heard of live and let live?
I have heard that expression before. I have.
Yeah, but there's a movement, a world peace movement called Live and Let Live, which is based on the non-aggression principle.
Oh, I see.
And it has the founder, Mark Victor, is very active. And there are chapters now all over the world, in the US, Portugal, Italy, Africa, Australia. I don't know of any in Spain yet, in Brazil yet, but if you look into it and you find it exciting, you might want to start one in Brazil. And I could also put you in touch with Mark Victor, a wonderful libertarian who'd make a great interview, and we could discuss that at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. How did you become a libertarian?
Oh, I mean, like before this pandemic started, I wasn't a libertarian, but then I came across Rothbard's book. I don't know if you know Anatomy of the State.
Yes.
So that's the book that essentially made me
Introduced you to it.
Yeah, with the libertarian thinking and movement. So
Yeah.
that's how I became. And today, like I have read many books, and it just makes sense to me, you know.
Oh, great.
And yeah.
And how'd you hear about Walter Block?
I have discovered him through one of his books called The Privatization of Roads and Highways.
Oh, yes. Very good.
Yeah, that's how I discovered him. And
I see. And are you in the field of economics?
well, no, I am a law student, law school. I am in
Oh,
law
okay.
school right now.
I see. Okay.
And but I really enjoy economics, the Austrian school, and yeah.
Okay, very good, very good. Anything else you want to ask me before we start?
No. I think if you can introduce yourself,
Yeah.
so the people watching, that's
Oh, and Vinicius, I just want to clean off my screen.
all right. That's fine.
This is not my screen, actually, my camera, so the screen doesn't look foggy. Okay. And how long do you want to go for?
It's up to you, really, sir. If you
Okay, so how about if we just talk and then whenever you would like to end it, that's fine.
All right. That sounds good. Sounds good to me.
Have you interviewed other libertarians?
Actually, no. Professor Block was the first one that we have arranged an interview, and it went really well. And yeah, and
Great.
That's it.
Good. Okay, I have no further questions for you, Vinicius.
All right. So the first question that I would like to ask you is, actually, Professor Block recommended me this topic.
Yeah.
So why Ayn Rand's concept of self-esteem is unreasonable?
Yeah. Right. So after I introduce myself, you'll ask me that question. Is that right?
Yes.
Great. Very good. I am ready whenever you are.
You can start now. You can start.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Vinicius, for having me on your podcast here in Spain. I'm in California. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've written 4 books on the subject. And I do a type of therapy called REBT, or Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which was devised in the 1950s by Albert Ellis and dramatically changed the course of the psychotherapy movement. From the old traditional idea that our emotional problems come from our childhood, dysfunctional childhood, and addicted parents or crazy parents, but that's not how we work. The central principle here is that our emotions and our emotional disturbance comes from our thinking. Our emotions come from our thinking, not from situations themselves. So, for example, if I have a job and then I'm fired and I'm depressed, it's not being fired that causes my depression, but it's my thinking about it. My ideas, values, opinions, perspectives in my head, what I tell myself about being fired, not the fact itself or not the situation itself, because different people in the same situation might have different emotions. So other people might feel a relief. They didn't like the job, they wanted to quit, they didn't know how to go about it, and this made it easy for them. Or they wanted to take another job that might give them a promotion or a raise or other benefits, and this also gave them an easy route for taking another job because they were fired. And other people might feel depressed, they can't pay the rent, or they can't buy food. So those are situations, but the depression comes from their thinking. So emotions come from our thinking, attitudes, and beliefs. And it's a particular kind of thinking. It's thinking in terms of demands: must, shoulds, supposed tos, have tos, demands we put on ourselves, others, and situations. For example, if we feel anxious, guilty, or depressed, it's usually, not always, but usually it's a demand we put on ourselves. And that takes the form of, because I prefer to do well and get approval, therefore I absolutely must, I have to do well and get your approval. And if I don't, this proves I'm a loser, I'm worthless, I'm a failure. So it's starting with these demands and then coming to the global evaluations. I'm no good. That would lead to my emotion, not the getting fired. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. And then, so you were asking about self-esteem, and Ayn Rand's concept of self-esteem. So feeling high self-esteem or low self-esteem, feeling good about oneself or poorly about oneself are emotions, they're feelings. And the same thing is true, our emotions come from situations. So the question is, what is the situation if you have low self-esteem or you feel poorly about yourself? So getting back to being fired, if I'm fired and I think I must not be fired, I have to keep this job, um, I'm a loser, then that thinking is going to lead to my low self-esteem, not being fired. And if I'm hired and I feel great about myself, I give myself high self-esteem, again, it comes from our thinking. And thinking thoughts such as, because I have this job, that's wonderful, and it makes me wonderful. So I feel high self-esteem. Now, one of the things to note about this is if I get the job and I say, that's wonderful, I rated the situation. The situation is wonderful, which is fine. But high self-esteem is when you overgeneralize from the rating of the situation, that's wonderful, to the rating of your total self, your personhood, your essence. Therefore, I'm a wonderful person. And that is false, because you're never a wonderful person if you do well, or a bad person if you do poorly. You and me and the rest of the human race are just imperfect humans who act imperfectly. We're never good or bad in toto. We're imperfect. So self-esteem is out the window, and that leads to the concept of unconditional self-acceptance. Instead of high or low self-esteem, unconditional self-acceptance means you accept yourself as the imperfect human you are, whether you do well or poorly, or people like you or dislike you. All through that, you're still the same imperfect human. So rating yourself up or rating yourself down doesn't make sense. You never turn into a god when you do well, or a devil when you do poorly, just a human who did well and poorly. And if you did well, a human who would be better off figuring out what you're doing well and maintaining it. And if you're doing poorly, a human would be better off figuring out what you're doing poorly and trying to improve. But high self-esteem is off the charts, and it doesn't look at your behavior. It looks at your total self, and sometimes leads you to develop a smug attitude. I have high self-esteem, I'm a good person, so there's no reason to look at my behavior because I'm a great guy and a scholar. So it tends to work against improvement. Also, it tends to lead to improving yourself rather than enjoying yourself, because if your ego is on the line, if your self-esteem is on the line, then the issue is, how could you maintain the high self-esteem? And that is prove over and over again that I'm a good person, which leads to anxiety, because you realize you may fail and then you'll be a bad person. So high self-esteem leads to the other side of the coin: low self-esteem when you do poorly, high self-esteem when you do well. So those are some of the problems with Ayn Rand's concept of self-esteem. But the key here, Vinicius, is that emotions like high self-esteem or low self-esteem don't come from situations, achievements, abilities, but they come from our thinking, and mainly thinking in terms of musts and shoulds. I must do well and get approval, and if I do, I'm good, And if I don't, I'm bad. So that's the general idea and the problem with Ayn Rand's or anyone else's idea that self-esteem is something to work toward or to be achieved.
Okay, I see. I see.
Any
So,
questions about that, or does that make sense?
no, that makes complete sense. I think I will just, if there isn't any questions by our audience, I think I'll just move to the next question.
Okay. So,
So the next question is, I guess, how to avoid libertarian feeling and burnout.
yeah.
Because for me, especially, I don't know if that's the case with most people, but for me, when you become libertarian, you sort of like uh, take the red pill. I don't know if you know this concept.
Yeah.
Like you take the red pill and then you start to see the world so differently. And then you're like, oh man, taxation is theft, and I never thought about this. And like the state is a gang of thieves and other libertarian, insights. And this can take, especially like for most young people, I think, a huge, like, how do I describe it? Toll on mental health. So I guess that's my question. How do we
Yeah.
mitigate and avoid like this burnout from,
Yeah. Right. So it's a good question, Vinicius. And the first thing you said that is when you discover the state is a gang of criminals, that could cause burnout. But the issue is, it's not the state being a gang of criminals, it's a situation. And a situation doesn't cause emotions to start thinking about it. And burnout normally means you feel hopeless, depressed, you give up, you resign, fighting for freedom and liberty. But the burnout comes from the must. And that is, and some of the common musts that lead to burnout is, it must be easy to achieve liberty. Or even worse, it must be easy to see some progress toward liberty. And I don't see any. This is awful, terrible, or horrible. It's hopeless. I'm hopeless. I might as well give up. So burnout is a type of depression. And it comes from these musts. I must be successful. The liberty movement must be successful. I thought after working on the liberty movement for 40 years, things would get better, and they're getting worse. And they must get better. So that leads to hopelessness, depression, burnout, giving up, those kinds of things. Now, you mentioned Walter Block earlier, and he's a great antidote to this, because he says one of the main reasons he's a libertarian and fights for libertarianism and writes for libertarianism is because it's fun. And if he was on a desert island and there was no government around, he'd still do his writing on libertarianism because he enjoys doing it. So it's fine to have a goal to try to increase freedom in the world, but when you make it into a must, what I'm doing must succeed or must make inroads into the state, then the must leads to global evaluations. If you don't get what you must, it's awful, it's terrible, it's horrible, I'll be miserable forever, and then you burn yourself out. So that's basically the case with burnout. Did you have any questions about that, Vinicius, before we go on to feuding?
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay, good. And then the feuding comes from anger, resentment, and hostility. You resent someone because they don't see it exactly your way. They don't agree with your strategies or tactics to get a freer world. And you have a must. They must agree with the way I see it. So people in think tanks who write about libertarianism might be the victim of anger from people who are activists. They shouldn't just write and sit in their ivory tower. They should, they must, they have to get out and be active and do something. And they're horrible people. And I'm going to change them as I must and show them the light as I must. And then usually the other person doesn't see the light. The other person thinks writing and being in a think tank is the way to go. These feuding people think that being an activist out on the streets and those kinds of things is the way to go. And then when they have a should or a must, remember the evil shoulds and musts, when they have a should or a must, they must see it my way, they must use my tactics, and because they don't, they're worthless people, they're failures. That leads to the kind of feuding and the idea that I have to get you to see the light. And also, sort of embedded in there is I control you, and you have to do my bidding because I have the word with a capital W. So that causes the feuding. And the solution to the feuding is questioning and contradicting your musts and shoulds. Although it would be desirable if Joe, John, or Fred saw it my way, there's no reason they have to. They're free agents with free will. They're going to do what they think is best, often not what I think is best. And although I find this frustrating, it's hardly horrible, terrible, or awful. And that leads to unconditional other acceptance, accepting other people with their imperfections. And we're assuming from your point of view, these are imperfections. We'll assume the worst. And accepting them as the imperfect humans they are, who have a right to their own views, their own strategies, even their own mistakes and idiocies. So acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, is the solution to feuding, anger, resentment, hostility, and leads to collaboratively discussing things with other people, dialoguing with people who have different liberty strategies than you, and try to understand their point of view, have them understand your point of view, and maybe they'll change, but maybe they don't. And the worst case scenario is they don't, but you may remind yourself, actually, the more different ways to get toward liberty, the more likely it may happen. So I don't know that this has been proven, but it seems to make some logical sense. If some people write for liberty, other people are activists in a libertarian direction, other people are speakers, other people try to persuade people on a one-on-one basis, other people are entrepreneurs and start think tanks, those kinds of things. So there are various different ways, but when you have that must, you don't see that. You just see my way is the right way and you must do it my way. So that's the cause of feuding, and the remedy, giving up the demands, the musts, the shoulds, the supposed tos or have tos. People must do it my way and adopt preferences. I prefer it, but if they don't do it my way, all this has is disadvantages. And if they do it my way, all this has its advantages, not world-ending scenarios or not a new world, just advantages and disadvantages. So that's the case against feuding and burnout.
All right. Yeah.
Any questions about that, Vinicius?
No. But
So
yeah,
all this, what's that?
no. That I just want to say that that's really, I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think, yeah, I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many people here in Brazil. And I think your answer will help many your answer will help many people here in our stream. So yeah.
Okay, very good. Before we go on to the next, I don't think I introduced myself at the beginning, so let me do that now.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I do all my therapy is remote on Zoom and FaceTime and Skype and other platforms that are remote. And so all my clients are on Zoom or FaceTime
Oh,
or Skype. And in the US, some are on phone also. And if you'd like, and also I have a podcast or weekly podcast called 3 Minute Therapy Podcast. And three is spelled out, 3 Minute Therapy Podcast. And 3 Minute Therapy is the name of one of my 4 books, which presents this view of psychotherapy in the first chapter and applies it to different problems in the following 13 chapters, such as anxiety, depression, anger, social phobia, panic attacks, procrastination, addictions, relationship problems, money worries, and others like that. And you can get my book, 3 Minute Therapy, on Amazon. And I have a website called 3minutetherapy.com. So those are ways to follow these ideas.
all right, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, can I go to the next question now?
Yes, I'm ready for the next question, Vinicius.
All right. So the next question is how to be emotionally free in an unfree world, because I think this has come up, especially this fact that the world is unfree, especially in this pandemic. Like the governments, they did all kinds of totalitarian measures, and yeah, I guess that's the question, how to be, I guess, yeah.
So it's how to be emotionally free in an unfree world.
Yeah.
And the way to be emotionally free is to free yourself of oppressive emotions like anxiety and depression and anger and resentment. And the way to do that is by identifying the emotion. I'm angry about the totalitarian government, or I'm resentful, or I feel depressed about it. So you've identified the how you're making yourself unfree emotionally, personally, by creating these unfree emotions for yourself. And then the solution is to remember these emotions come from our thinking, not from the vicious government, but from our thinking. Therefore, what's my thinking that's causing me to have these emotions, which I find very oppressive? And again, we're looking at the musts and shoulds, escalating preferences into musts and shoulds. And there are 3 main musts that people have. So if you feel angry, anxious, or depressed, it comes back down to one of these 3 main musts. The first one tends to create anxiety, guilt, and depression, and comes from the idea that because I prefer to do well and to get approval, it's a high preference to do well and get approval. Therefore, I absolutely must. I have to do well and get approval. And if I don't, that leads to a global evaluation psychologically, not logically, but psychologically. I'm no good. I'm a loser. I'm a bad person. I'm worthless. So by identifying the musts and shoulds, because I prefer to, I must do well and get approval, then the solution is identify those musts and question, challenge, and contradict your musts. There are no musts. They're all fictions. We invent them in our head, but there are strong preferences. Advantages if we get what we prefer, disadvantages if we don't get what we prefer. that makes sense, but not, I'm no good, or it's the end of the world, or I can't stand it, or anything like that. So, so that's the solution to being free of emotional disturbance. And then when you're free of emotional disturbance, anger, resentment, hostility, anxiety, depression, burnout, those kinds of things, then you're likely to think more clearly about what's going on in the world and more clearly figure out the best ways to address it.
Okay. Okay. That's yeah. I mean, let me just see if there's another question here. Oh yeah. So I guess the next question would be how to avoid psychological depression during economic depressions.
Yeah.
And I guess that's really there's little present because in many countries, like the lockdowns and governments shutting off businesses, like and people, especially here in Brazil too. Like even my dad wasn't able to work, wasn't able to open his commerce, and so I guess that's my question: how to avoid psychological depression during these difficult times.
Oh, that's a very good question. And the answer is, if you're depressed about the economic depression or your depressed state of affairs, remember there's two types of depression. There's emotional depression and economic depression. Now, you or I didn't create the economic depression. The government did to a large extent.
Yeah.
But if we're depressed, we created our own depression because it's our emotions. No one could force us to feel anything like depression. So then look to the core, look to the immediate cause of your depression, your psychological depression. And again, that's escalating your preferences into demands, musts, and shoulds. So if you're unemployed and the money is not coming in and you're depressed, you probably are thinking that I prefer to have a job, I prefer to pay the rent, I prefer to afford food to eat. Because if I do what I prefer, I have advantages. If I can pay the rent, that's a great advantage. And if I can't pay the rent, that's a great disadvantages. So we have advantages and disadvantages. But then you escalate that I prefer to have a job and prefer to pay the rent into demands, musts, and shoulds. Because I prefer to have a job, I absolutely must. I have to. I need to have a job. And if I don't, I'm no good. Life is no good. It's awful, terrible, and horrible, and I can't stand it. And those are fictions. So to overcome the depression, overcome the ideology behind it, your beliefs, and show yourself no musts, no shoulds, no, there's nothing that has to be the way I want it to be, like have a job. I don't run the universe, and I don't control the government or the jobs or anything like that. And I can unconditionally accept my bad condition without eating myself up inside about it. And when I get depressed, I'm eating myself up emotionally inside about it, and that won't help me get a job. If anything, I'll feel less motivated to look for a job, to get out, and more motivated to stay in bed all day with my depression. So that tends to be counterproductive. So this approach is particularly useful in hard times when people are more likely to depress themselves. There's more depression, there's more suicide, there's more homelessness, those kinds of things. And this largely comes from their thinking and their hopeless and helpless emotions that comes from what they tell themselves about the situation. So look for the must, look for the should, and abolish your musts and shoulds. It's sort of a parallel with libertarianism. We want to look for the government under every corner and abolish the government, because we realize the government has perverse incentives, not the kind of incentives we have in a free market, but they have perverse incentives of power. So wherever we can abolish the government, as Murray Rothbard said, the better, and the better off we'll be. So down with the state and up with, and down with demands, musts and shoulds, and up with human action, spontaneous order in the market, and preferences, desires, and wishes in our heads, but no musts or shoulds. So that's the main way to avoid psychological depression in economic depression.
Okay, that's very good. So I have one last question for you here. Is that okay?
Oh, yes, I'm open. I have time for as many questions as you have.
All right, all right. So the question is, the common description many use for libertarians is socially liberal and socially conservative. But some say the opposite is true, that only socially conservative people will maintain an orderly society in libertarianism or anarchism. So I was wondering what do you think the social values of libertarians should be, or if social values even matter? So this question, it's more on the libertarian side, I guess, than the psychological side. But since you are yourself a libertarian, that's my question to you.
Okay, very good. So what do I recommend as social values for libertarianism? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, well, there's a relatively new movement, a world peace movement called Live and Let Live, and it's been largely developed by a lawyer named Mark Victor. And he has a very nice improvement over libertarianism in my mind. And that is, in addition to the non-aggression principle, he has something he calls ethical values or ethical aspirations. And they are largely social values, as you're asking about, Vinicius. And they're values such as be open-minded, be civil, be tolerant, be willing to dialogue about issues, be respectful, those kinds of things. And I think those social values that Live and Let Live movement has added puts a much nicer face on libertarianism, and it helps libertarians themselves get along better and to some extent avoid some feuding and burnout and those kinds of things. Because if you follow those social values, then you're less likely to argue with other people, get angry at them, be hostile, resentful toward them, because the social values include tolerance, respect, civility, those kinds of things. And anger, resentment, hostility, burnout, and feuding is the opposite of that. Anger and resentment, not ethical aspirations, tends to lead to problems in the libertarian movement. And one of the things about libertarianism, it doesn't aspire to any of these social values, but the Live and Let Live movement, the global peace movement, does. So that's my suggestion. And I'm now active in the Live and Let Live movement, and in the process of starting a chapter in California where I live. But there are chapters all over the world, in Africa, Australia, Portugal, Italy, And I think there's one in Colombia, South America. So there's one starting in England, I believe. So this seems to be catching on pretty quickly, and it has these social values, or what Live and Let Live calls ethical aspirations, or these ethical values in how to treat other people beyond just the non-aggression principle.
I see. I see. And since um, you said that you have you have plenty of time, I would just like to ask you one last question, and this is
Yeah.
one that it's my question. And what do you think is the best argument to convince people that libertarianism is the way to go? You know, because for me, the best argument is the ethical argument. You know, it's not the practical one. Like, yeah,
Mhm.
things would be better off in a free market, and
Yeah.
yes, people would be more prosperous. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter much, because the argument for me, at least, is ethical. You know, it's on the ethical, like the ethical arena. And I think so. So that's my question to you. What do you think should be the best way to convince people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the way I was convinced was I met Walter Block in the 1970s, and we had a lot of political discussions because I was a liberal Democrat then, and he persuaded me over the course of 2 years to libertarianism. And he used both ethical and practical arguments. But getting back to your specific question, Vinicius, I don't think there's an overall best argument that will persuade all the people all the time. It depends on what's important to them. So the first thing to do when you want to persuade someone is to find out what their view is, what their thinking is, and get a sense of, are they focused on the consequences or on the ethics? And then try to address what their concerns are. So I don't think so. The thing to do is use ethical arguments when it seems some people appeal to that more, and use consequentialist arguments when it seems like some people appeal to that more. But that doesn't mean exclusively and 100%. So it'd be good to bring in once in a while some of the other arguments when you're focusing more on the argument that relates to the person you're dealing with. So there are some people, and I imagine you've met them, ethical arguments doesn't mean much to them, and it's just the practical. They don't think it's taxation is theft and theft is wrong, for example, because they think that if you take people's money that belongs to them to help a larger group or poor people, then that trumps the ethical. So the consequentialist or practical trumps the ethical. In that case, you would work more on the practical. If someone thinks it's ethical to steal, there's not that much you can do on ethics that I know of, but there's a lot you can do on the consequences of the stealing and how it hurts these people you're trying to help. So that would be my advice on that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, doctor, I think if there isn't any questions, let me just see here. So sorry, there's one person typing here. So I'll just. So, doctor, I think that's it. That's what we had it here, and I don't want to take more of your time. And so I want to thank you for being here today. It was our honor to have you. And yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vinicius, and I enjoyed your questions. They were to the point. And just in concluding, I want to remind your viewers, I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist. I have a remote practice, Zoom, Skype, FaceTime, other platforms. I have a book, which you can see right here, 3-Minute Therapy, Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life, which goes into these ideas much more extensively and elaborates with examples, and you could get that on Amazon, 3-Minute Therapy. I also have a 3-Minute Therapy podcast, which you can find on YouTube and Podbean. And again, 3 is spelled out, 3-Minute Therapy.
Right.
I also wanted to, since we discussed the live and let live philosophy and movement briefly, if you want to find out more about that, you can go to the URL liveandletlive.org, liveandletlive.org. And if you have any further questions, if you go to my website, 3minutetherapy.com, you'll get my email address there, which is Dr. Edelstein at 3minutetherapy.com. And feel free to send me emails, ask me questions, anything that interests you about my approach to therapy. By the way, I didn't make up this approach to therapy. It was devised by a brilliant psychologist in the 1950s named Albert Ellis, E-L-L-I-S, and he's written over 80 books. So you can also read some of his books, E-L-L-I-S, Albert Ellis, and he has some interviews on YouTube as well. Thank you again, Vinicius.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the questions and the interview, and it was also nice meeting you. Good to meet you, and keep spreading the freedom message.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.